All right, let's get started. So first, would love to get a round of applause for the speakers that we have up here for taking the time to come out here. So I'm sure they'll give a more detailed introduction, but I'll just name them off really quickly. We have Omar here, founder and CEO of WeaveChain, Michael, founder and CEO of DeSci, and Mr. Tim Peterson here, Dr. Peterson, who is a contributor at VitaDAO. So would first love to kick it off with you guys just giving like a more in-depth intro about yourself and a little bit about a short synopsis of what you're working on and how it contributes to the DeSci ecosystem.
I'll kick it off at the end. So I'm Omar, founder and CEO of WeaveChain. If you watched the last panel, I would like to consider myself a top 10% Eagles fan, so go Birds. At WeaveChain, what we're trying to do is be a secure data exchange layer. So instead of trying to sort of like rebuild the internet with Web3, we go and weave legacy infrastructure into Web3 by attaching to databases and giving them Web3 properties. So that could be Web3 security by establishing immutability guarantees by anchoring to the blockchain, proof of X, we like to call it, or X to earn models, and effectively making it so you can transfer tokens for data in a way that doesn't require you building out smart contracts or doing anything like that.
Cool. My name is Michael. I'm from New York. Before this, I was at Stanford finishing a PhD in computer science and natural language processing. And I founded DeSci. We raised money from Polychain, and we are like a Web3 Firebase, a Firebase for Web3. So what that means is like every row in the database is an NFT that can be exchanged for people. So when you come into a data set, when you enter a row into a form online, it automatically mints an NFT for you as your row, and then when you go into your MetaMask, you see all the rows that you have minted across the entire internet. And what's also really cool is like the database is managed by a DAO. So when you submit data into it, there's a multi-sig for that data set, and then the row is either accepted or rejected by the DAO, so you get really, really high quality data in a data set, which can be sold to other people and monetized, and the people who contributed to the data set are also given rewards in USDC. And yeah, so we're working together with a couple of different things. Are we talking about that now or later?
We'll go into that a little bit more later.
Okay, yeah, so basically it's like a Web3 Firebase.
So I'm Tim Peterson. I'm a professor at WashU and School of Medicine, and I'm an entrepreneur and have two companies building therapeutics, and steward at VitaDAO, which basically means I just kind of help facilitate things. I've been there since the beginning. And I think what's interesting about VitaDAO is, so we are a longevity biotech. Essentially, we're not a venture capital firm, but we invest in longevity biotech. And I think longevity is particularly interesting because so aging is the number one risk factor for pretty much most common diseases. COVID, of course, you've heard about Alzheimer's, et cetera. And so a lot of people are pursuing a lot of different diseases, but I think longevity, being someone who's been in kind of biomedical research for over 2 decades, it's the most interesting to me because it's really kind of subsumes all of everything having to do with medicine, biomedicine, and health. So the Mark Andreessen very cliched comment about software eating the world, I think longevity is going to kind of eat healthcare basically, because it's everything when you think about human health. And then, so in terms of like crypto angle for VitaDAO, we do fund traditional projects. That's not very kind of Web3-ish, but we of course have a token, and then which enables memberships and a variety of other kind of utility. And then we have these IP NFTs, which are kind of pioneered by this organization called Molecule, where we're putting the patents and data sets into IP so that the information can be traded in markets, and so just kind of increase the liquidity, kind of bridge the valley of death better with biotech assets, particularly therapeutics and diagnostics. So,
yeah, thank you for those overviews. As like I'm sure folks in the audience can see, like there's a wide variety of like different products that encompass this sector called DeSci. I'd love to hear from each of you, what is the definition of DeSci to you, and how does that reflect like what you're building, especially given the fact that when it comes to using data to model things like IP or using data to facilitate things like generalized information exchange. DeSci kind of has this broad scope. Would love to hear how do you guys define it as people who are building in the sector?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's all about collaborative or decentralized research, really. So, trying to figure out ways that you can have multiple parties contributing data to a common pool that research can be done on top of, and then ideally having researchers actually collaborate on their efforts to sort of prevent as much data hoarding and siloing of research as possible. So imagine, you have researchers at UPenn that are doing a study. Maybe they would benefit from collaborating with people at MIT, Stanford, and Dartmouth that are doing the exact same kind of study, right? Instead of each of them trying to find their own little niche data set, let's go and have a collaborative data set between them and figure out ways to share, the IP rights over the data and the research in a way that's fair, but again, it is greater than the sum of the parts because they're doing it together.
Yeah, I think to me, DeSci is about accelerating science. So coming from an academic background and just finishing the PhD, I've realized how slow a lot of science was and how not reproducible it was many times. And I saw a way of DeSci could really accelerate things in the same way GitHub accelerates software development. I think blockchain and new tools can accelerate science. I think the other thing I would say I'm excited about is DeSci is doing things that can't really necessarily be done in existing scientific infrastructure. So clinical trials today are done using maybe 100 or 1,000 people. But there's Reddit communities out there with hundreds of thousands of people that all are very, very passionate about a certain thing. So you can't really do a clinical trial with hundreds of thousands of people for cost reasons, logistic reasons. So the power of DeSci is we can do things that really aren't doable with existing infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely. So I think just to add to that, maybe I think more what Omar said. I think the coordination that's just a key layer. Kind of blanked in my thoughts, so maybe you keep going, and I'll remember in a second.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really interesting, and one of the things that I find most compelling about DeSci is kind of the market history of the people who work in it, right? A lot of people that I've met who work in DeSci, which honestly has been a sector that's only really existed for the greater part of a year and a half, have been working in the medical industry, have been entrepreneurs for multiple decades. I'd love to hear a little bit more about each one of your stories and why each of you decided to invest in, build in, and commit your life to an industry that's only 1.5 years old after spending decades in perhaps other industries or different sectors.
So maybe my thought that I just remembered is, a DeSci basically is the way science should be done. And it's kind of, we all, particularly people at universities, like a lot of us, we should all be working together. I think the major issue is the same with all in crypto, just as the incentives are in line. So we add value. I was at Harvard and MIT before. You deliver a lot of value to these types of universities. And you really don't, you get some because you can put their name on your reputation, on your CV, but you don't really get the value that you kind of put into it. So I think it's the same with all types of crypto projects, not just DeSci, that I think just what's been exciting for me being, like I said, in several decades kind of into biomedical research is just, finally I feel like we have a way to, for people to get the right incentives out of their efforts. And, I've been trying to build in the space for a long time, and really what was lacking is kind of the critical mass of people. So just there wasn't DeSci. The term was only coined a year or so ago. So, so I think it's just, we've all been wanting for this to happen, and now that everyone's kind of all having the same realization at the same time, it's just a great time to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Sure, I can jump in. Well, my background is as a giant data nerd. So I was at a hedge fund for 10 years. I ran R&D and quantitative strategies, and then I did enterprise software for 5 years. But I actually got into this DeSci space because I've been running a crazy experiment where I've tracked my entire life for the past 6 years down to the 5 minutes because the data is fascinating. It's a weird challenge that I'm trying to optimize. And we built out an app to try to figure out if we could do this automatically. If I'm connected to your wearable, your computer, your mobile device, your calendar, and using AI, can I figure out how you spend all of your time automatically and then help you spend time better? And it was going great, except for we went and built the world's greatest spyware. We had this insanely sensitive information about people. And in Web 2, all you can really do is promise people that you're going to be a good steward of their data. So that's just not enough, right? It was pretty creepy stuff. And we started building technology to figure out if we could use Web3 to make that more ethical and efficient. So make it so that people could see every time their data was accessed or used in a machine learning model. And ideally actually be compensated if somebody wanted to do research on that data. So, if somebody wanted to run a study on how I spend my time, or let's say more like an anonymized version of myself, I'm actually fine with that. Like, I don't want them to know what I was doing at 2 a.m. on Saturday, but I am okay with them understanding, how many hours a year I work, sleep, watch TV. And so, when we went and tried to start building this, and what we found was that there was no solution out there that was like GDPR HIPAA compliant, which is sort of required for most really sensitive personal data. And there was no way to go and actually do the economics behind that to incentivize users to want to share that data without really complex smart contract engineering that everybody was doing in a bespoke way. And so when we started building WeaveChain to be generic for that, we actually found this decentralized science community that was doing the same thing for all these different kinds of data sets. So as opposed to time data, people are doing it for your electronic health record or genomic data. And it was really cool that this crazy idea that we had, we found a lot of other people that had similar crazy ideas, and we've just been trying to support their efforts.
Yeah, I think I got interested in it because I was interested in science and saw that there could probably be there could be a better way of doing science than what we have now with publishing, with funding, with reproducibility, and we didn't necessarily have to be considering just people that went to a university to be a scientist, but there's a much larger population of people out there who could, with the right tools, with AI, with YouTube, with curiosity, could become scientists in the same way that people who are at universities today. So it would be about thinking about more broadly how science is done, and I think that was my motivation for getting into it.
Can I add one more anecdote? So
Of
if you guys have heard of CRISPR, that's this kind of gene editing technology, right? That's revolutionizing everything. So I think this is, I don't mean to pick on this because it's obviously incredible innovation, but in history, there's always kind of one victor or one entity, one small group of people. I think so. In the case of CRISPR, there was over 350 papers on CRISPR for over a decade before the paper that gave rise to the Nobel Prize. So not taking anything away from the Nobel Prize and of course all the success that those inventors had, but those I don't know how many thousands of people that contributed to the development of this, game-changing technology are kind of just lost in the dustbin of history. So I think DeSci offers the promise where people that have contributed all along the way could be part of that rather than just kind of footnotes in history.
Yeah, and this idea of kind of being able to supercharge that social coordination is something that I personally see as a large trend. I know you kind of tapped on this idea of social coordination being a core focus of the sector. And I notice a lot of the kind of emerging DAOs in the ecosystem are all focused on this idea. I'm really curious, what specifically do you think about DAO infrastructure in DeSci, or simply the idea of using DAOs within the context of DeSci gives rise to this impetus of let's make social coordination better? How are DAOs really enabling this? I wanted to ask this to you. Yeah.
I mean, I'll say maybe simply, I'll keep it simple. You guys can go. I mean, our token helps quite a bit. Of course, helps kind of glue everyone together, align people around one goal. Again, imagine if Penn had a token, how much, where you would share in the value you're creating here. I think it would be a really fascinating experiment. So I think that really helps with the coordination.
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to jump in. I think one of the things that's weird about science today is we think of a scientist and they do soup to nuts. And that happens because everyone's in a lab with a PI, so there's a lot of confounding roles that people have to take. But what's cool about a distributed system is that, or look at a Discord, everyone has different badges based on what their role is. And I think that's really key because now we can think of science not just being done by one person or a small group of people, but by a large, one person has the idea, and then another group of people go out and collect the data, and another people go out and analyze the data, and then another group publishes it. And with these well-defined roles and interfaces that will probably develop that probably don't exist right now, to be honest, but will develop in the future, the distributed thing will allow for interfaces to exist in which place people can coordinate like between different roles more easily.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. Like, I think the perspective you guys gave is that like the top-down structure of the people that are doing a lot of the work, it can be a little bit more efficient with a DAO because it's like fluid as well, right? And on the token incentive piece, I would just add that I think that a lot of the people that want to like contribute to these efforts don't want to do a ton of work, and that's not a bad thing, right? Like, you know, the guys over at Data Lake, Wojciech, they call their model consent to earn. And the idea is like, if you are willing to go and give access to your electronic health record in an anonymized way for research, you just provide them consent and they will find a way to passively give you tokens in exchange for research that's done. And you know, I think that's a fine contribution for a member of a DAO to just say, I consent, I'm okay with it, now please include me in whatever economic model the people that are putting a lot of effort into it are gonna do. It's sort of like having a broker that's gonna help you so that you can just be a passive participant but still be supporting the effort.
It seems like kind of the focal point of social coordination at the end of the day is the people, right? The people underlying it. I'm really curious because, you know, all of you upstate or on stage have, you know, decades of experience in your various sectors. A lot of people in DeSci have a wealth of experience. Do you think the barrier to entry to really being a valuable contributor in DeSci is different from the other sectors in like the Web3 industry? Curious if you think that's true, and if not, what does it take to really be a contributor in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, like, we do not have the benefits of like degen economics that you get with a lot of other parts of Web3 that have been like explosive for the growth in a really good way. You know, I'm excited to see more applications come on that can make it easy for a user to again, just give consent and then be earning as part of that ecosystem. But it's still gonna take a long time to slog through, frankly, enterprise processes to go and have that be useful, right? Like, you know, to go and actually interact with the pharmaceutical companies that are trying to get access to that anonymized data. You know, PharmaLedger is the consortia in the EU that has like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and GlaxoSmithKline there. They've, for the past 3 years, been doing an exploratory pilot that has ended up in like, you know, some YouTube videos that are really cool, but not like proper research. To actually embed, you know, decentralized science principles in their processes is gonna take time. And I think that's just gonna be a barrier to it having mass adoption.
Yeah, I think, I mean, DeSci is a little bit different than DeFi. Like, there is some amount of technical knowledge that is needed by participants to conduct an experiment or to analyze data or to have like a base level of understanding. I mean, I think I could envision a world where you don't necessarily need a ton of knowledge, or you could be like a domain expert within a certain field. And I think that would be amazing. I think it's like just like education and like technical knowledge is sort of one of the things that will be needed.
Yeah, so I think kind of to chime in on that point, I think there's no barrier of entry for, you know, particularly young people, trainees. I mean, it's very welcoming, all these communities. But I think we will have some barriers to get some of the more senior people involved because, you know, essentially, you know, crypto is pretty. Reputation systems don't really exist, right? So, you know, Crypto Moonboy 69 can have, you know, particularly if they have more tokens, right? They can have kind of more power than somebody with, you know, decades of experience. So I think we do have to solve this reputation issue because you're not going to want to lend your reputation if you earned it in the trad world for 2 decades to, you know, some project, or also not be taken seriously because, you know, you've got these kind of trad credentials and you're getting kind of outvoted by, you know, these degens. So I think we have to solve the barriers to entry more for the senior people, like Michael was saying, with the, you know, deep tech background. I mean, there is value to that, and you can't just kind of meme your way, you know, through DeSci, basically.
Yeah, so it really takes like one, like context within technical knowledge within either a scientific setting or, you know, within kind of a technical implementation sense, or it kind of takes like previous experience in kind of previous sectors that are somewhat adjacent, which makes sense. I would say I'm curious to kind of tap in a little bit more into some of the specific trends in DeSci and some of the specific occurrences and to really dig a little bit deeper into like, okay, like what's actually happening. I'd like to talk to you two first, especially within kind of the focus of the usage of bringing data on chain. Can you talk about like what is the core value proposition of hosting on chain data? Like outside of we see a lot of kind of protocols come up that focus on like data analytics, but a lot less when it comes to hosting data natively on chain. What's the core use case there?
I'll jump in and just say that I'm very hesitant about storing data on chain per se. Like, you know, we're very mindful of GDPR and HIPAA compliance, which require the right to delete data, which is really hard to do if it's on chain, or provide like physical safeguards like firewalls, not just encryption for HIPAA. We do blockchain anchoring, but you know, your key point here is like, what's the value of using Web3 data? And we break it down into you're either trying to establish like proof of X, and for us that means lineage for the data. Like I want to know who's accessing my data, when it's being copied on different servers. Like all these things just don't exist for you today. And that doesn't mean they're not actually happening. Like I think we're all kind of comfortable that Facebook and Google are using our data in nefarious ways, but your electronic health record at the hospital is being sold right now in an anonymized way. Like IMS made $2.6 billion of revenue in 2014 selling like your health data from hospitals, and I think people aren't really aware of that today. And we should have that lineage the same way you can see it in a block explorer. But the other side of it is again, these X-to-earn models, where if there is going to be a business around this stuff, like I don't think IMS is doing nefarious things, that data is being used for good research, we should let people know and include them in the value chain. And the amount that you may earn as an individual isn't gonna be like monumental, it's not gonna change your life, but you should be part of that process. You shouldn't be like the product.
Yeah, I think there's different types of data. I think some data you want to like put on a server, but I think there's other types of data you want on chain. So for example, like NFTs are on chain, and there's a lot of benefits to that. One is like you open your wallet and you see all the NFTs you own. You go to OpenSea, you can see all the NFTs there. You then go into a game and you can use those NFTs there. And like in the same way, like what we built at DBDAO is like you go to a social media app and you post a tweet in that social media app, and then you look in your MetaMask wallet and that tweet is there, so that when you go to another app like your Facebook or something, or another or your profile, you see all your data and other people can interact with all that data. And so you have like this flat namespace which people can link assets between each other. And that's not something that wasn't really able to be done prior when data is stored on like a central server. You can't link between data. Your data doesn't flow with you, but when it's like either when it's on the blockchain and like stored on the blockchain, I think it opens up new types of opportunities that we didn't see before in like Web 2. So, I mean, I think the thing that's exciting is like the types of apps that don't yet exist, where like I create a row on booking.com for a hotel, and then I go to Airbnb and like somehow that's linked to that. And like there's all sorts of like new types of applications. And I think for the same way like DeSci, like maybe I post a picture of a bird on Twitter, and then I go to some sort of bird watching group, and all my data that I've posted on Twitter is now automatically imported.
Yeah, the silos suck, right?
Yeah.
They're super inefficient, and preventing good research from happening, making it interoperable is gonna help so many different things that we can't even foresee right now, probably.
Yeah.
And speaking of making things that were previously impossible possible, I think that's one of the main focuses at DeSci when it comes to creating kind of a crowdsourced way of funding these more kind of upstart projects that may have not gotten the opportunity to be able to access that funding previously. I'm curious, is there one kind of opportunity that you'd like to share that has been one of the more exciting things that DeSci has funded recently?
Yeah, so there's been a couple really interesting cases. I mean, so the issue with longevity and funding aging, kind of anti-aging drugs, is that there's the FDA, we're kind of regulated by the FDA, and so you can't just treat aging. You have to treat a disease. So we ultimately kind of have to focus on not the end goal, which is kind of extend health span, which is the healthy period of your life and lifespan, but treating specific diseases. Of course, that's very important, treating Alzheimer's and these types of things, but I think the thought is to go for something that would have a general effect, improve your health generally, would kind of all in one shot treat cancer, heart disease, all these things with one approach, and that's kind of what we call gerotherapy, something that has this kind of pervasive effect, not just for one disease. So we have this kind of chicken and the egg. We can't really proceed, so we do what we can. I think one study which is it may not be seen by many people in our community as very exciting, is a drug that's called bisphosphonates. These are like the main drugs for osteoporosis. So these are like off-patent drugs. Almost no one cares about them. I've gotten grants on them, but it's been hard fought to even get grants on these things because they're kind of a dead subject. But this is really the reason I'm particularly excited about it is because it'd be the first drug to actually prove what I just said, which is it's a drug for osteoporosis that could potentially, there's been studies that suggest it could also have cardioprotective effects. And so women taking these drugs have less heart attacks. So their mortality due to nothing to do with their bone is reduced. So it's a very simple example, but I think this is, these kind of incremental examples are how you kind of shift the Overton window and what's possible. And so that's been an interesting case because it's like, well, this is like boring. Why are we doing like this drug repurposing? Why aren't we doing moonshots? I'm like, well, this is a moonshot in some sense because again, it's kind of going from one disease to two, and it's practical today, and there's actually a patent path for it. Though the goal is not to, of course, make a lot of money, but to more prove the concept. So that's been an interesting one. There's another one that I think is also very interesting, which is divided our community. Maybe you guys will find this a little more exciting. So there's a company called Z Biotics. They're a Y Combinator company. They do engineered probiotics, where they engineer different enzymes in the probiotics to do different functions. So their first product is reduces acetaldehyde, which is the main toxic component of alcohol. So they're marketing it as essentially as a hangover probiotic, and it works incredibly well. And people in our community are like, well, this isn't longevity. This is just like helping people to not, to fix their hangovers. I'm like, but everyone on earth drinks alcohol, and you're not going to prevent people from doing that. And so I'm saying we should fund this, and everyone's like, no, we shouldn't fund this because this is not like a moonshot. I'm like, well, it's a moonshot if you fix the 75% of people on Earth's health by getting rid of the main toxic component of alcohol, which contributes to cancer and all kinds of horrible stuff. So it's more like philosophical stuff, I think, that have been the interesting projects we've had so far. Yeah.
Tim, can you share the devil's advocate part of that one?
The devil's advocate is just that reducing the toxic components of alcohol would dramatically improve our health span. I mean, that's just, there's no question, and actually would improve lifespan. I mean, it would guarantee, if you got rid, I guarantee, it would have a dramatic effect. And so, but because it's being, it's not being sold by Pfizer, it's not, it's kind of being marketed as a kind of hangover, medicine. And of course, but the thing is, the platform can actually do, of course, they can engineer all types of microbes to do all types of different things. And of course, that's also part of the reason why I thought they could fund it. It's a gene therapy. It's a gene therapy approach. So it's just been interesting to see the philosophical divide. You have to have the longevity purists say, well, yeah, unless you can make a mouse live, 2 times as long, I don't care about this. It's like, well, this is actually fixing a real world problem today and would have a huge effect on humans today.
So I was fishing out the funny one, which is if you cure hangovers, people will drink more.
So yeah. So I mean, but I think that's true about a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things where if you do this, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
I'm curious, out of these projects you've funded so far, has there been one that's made really marked progress that you would like to remark on?
Well, it's, particularly biotech takes a long time. There's, yes and no. Actually, this bisphosphonate example did come out of a Danish, so not like in America, a lot of countries have, national registries where they keep track of prescriptions. So they have, billions of prescriptions in Denmark. And so bisphosphonates came out of that study as something that made people live longer. So that was, it was, again, it's kind of boring drug that no one cares about, but we think we have a way to make it kind of more interesting. And so, having access to that data was pretty exciting. So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting to hear. Also kind of want to touch on a recent event, kind of external to the industry, but really seemed to kind of spark an explosion in the types of companies that grew out of it. There's a recent October legislative decision in Congress that increased and expanded kind of consumer rights to healthcare data. I'm curious, we've seen an explosion of kind of data solutions in DeSci following that decision. Or Michael, are there certain projects or certain kind of sectors that you think haven't really been tapped into yet that are really compelling and could be tapped into as a result of this decision?
Yeah, for sure. I was looking into this again. I found that stat that in 2014, those guys, IMS Health, generated $2.6 billion of selling people's health data in an anonymized fashion that people just weren't aware of. And so the regulation makes it really easy for individuals to go and pull their data across all the hospitals they've ever visited into a single electronic health record quickly. Previously, it would be like 6 months and navigating with a hospital to try to figure out each bit. Now it's super simple. So a company called One Health lets you go and do this, and they have an app for it. And they literally sold the company 4 days after that regulation was announced. And the cool thing that we're seeing is that the guys Data Lake over in Europe, again, Europe was sort of ahead of the curve on this. They have they're working on their electronic health data space. And Data Lake says, again, you give us electronic consent, we can go to the hospitals for you, establish that singular electronic health record, and then compensate you whenever it's used for research. That's so much easier than trying to source that data individually from people, from sources that are not as accurate, like your wearables and things like that. And it's going to scale a lot better. They say they have access to 2 million patient records today that they can go and get consent for to bring to these data economies. I want to see that coming to the U.S. as well. But it's going to take time to sort of navigate the regulatory environment. But this is a big step in the right direction to open that data up.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I was reading up on it also. So they expanded out what is the healthcare record that you're allowed to get. Just like an anecdote is when I was in school, I was curious to see what kind of healthcare records they got. So I actually went through the process and signed all the forms, and you get a DVD with all your x-rays, and because they can't email it to you for whatever reason. And so I had to buy it then a DVD player on Amazon because no laptop or computer has it in, obviously. But what I will say is it's very it's confusing. It's a log of hundreds of pages, or I don't remember how many pages. It was a lot of pages of I'm healthy, but just when you go in, it has pages and pages of stuff. And I was actually talking to my friend who's a doctor, and she's like, yeah, no doctor's ever going to read through that. And it got me thinking, we probably need tools like AI or something to be able to parse that entire sort of unstructured data set and make it generally usable. I will say also that I think it's useful. I don't know how useful it is will be in DeSci just because it's unstructured and not maybe so relevant. And I just wanted to touch on a quick thing of how other types of patient portals are existing. So we recently started working with HairDAO, which is a DAO for hair loss. And what's really cool is they've created this whole patient portal that's powered by DBDAO, where they're testing out different trials of drugs and in a very well-structured way. And they're leveraging the power of this 150,000 person Reddit community who are all very interested in this subject. So I don't know that we have to rely on the existing infrastructure too much. There is possible ways to recreate data sets fairly quickly. We're also working with Altaflora to do epilepsy DAO for parents whose kids have epilepsy. They find that when they give them CBD, it can help to reduce that. So that's a clinical trial that will never be done in a hospital or a government setting. So I don't know that we have to get too head over heels about trying to fit DeSci into the existing infrastructure, because then we're just recreating that. I think it's probably a better idea to look into other types of data sets or other types of communities that exist and how we can empower them and test new things out that aren't being tested out within the existing system.
And with that being said, one last thing I kind of wanted to touch on along this kind of idea of the kind of untapped things in DeSci. What are one of the most compelling trends that you see, either do you think are now currently happening in DeSci, or you think are going to be the trend for the next 3, maybe 5 years, that you find the most exciting and you're looking forward to contributing?
I love the consent to earn stuff. Again, I think in the best kind of way, people are lazy, but they want to help. You want to feel like you're contributing to a larger mission, but if it can just be, I click this button and then you can go and figure everything out for me and do it in an ethical way, you're going to get a lot of grassroots movement supporting these causes.
I would say the elimination of the human scientist in favor of like ChatGPT like scientists. So I think like the idea that science can only be done by a human is like very passé. And we should be thinking about how can we have research assistants that are ChatGPT or PIs that are ChatGPT, and how do we use large language models to augment the scientific process. So like just for fun, I built this little thing that it was like a ChatGPT research scientist, and it basically said like, come up with a hypothesis, and it came with a bunch of, come up with like a research question, and it came with a bunch of research questions, and then I just like, number 2. And then I was like, come up with a bunch of hypotheses, and then it came with a hypothesis, and then I was like, generate a research method, and it generated like instructions of things. And this was just for a baking soda and vinegar volcano, so very simple. And then I was like, what kind of data do you want me to collect? And it's like, here's the data I want you to collect. So then I collected the data, I did the experiment, and then I was like, write up the research report, and it wrote the whole thing up. And I was like, okay, so basically you can automate the entire like scientific process of like question, research, hypothesis, methods, results, conclusion. And I think so getting back to the example of the healthcare records, like we need to be thinking about how AI fits into like the DeSci game, and how we can like leverage this like world-changing technology so that we're not just like recreating the existing like academic system that previously existed, but how do we use like AI?
And that fits really nicely so the FDA just released this thing recently, well maybe not so recently, but called the FDA Modernization Act. So a lot of, there's this kind of joke in medicine and biopharma that essentially that drug discovery takes longer and costs more money basically every year. It's the inverse of the Moore's kind of famous Moore's law, where computing gets faster and it's less expensive. So it's called Ehrum's law, just the kind of the name spelled backwards. So the FDA Modernization Act is hopefully going to kind of combat this Ehrum's law, enabling researchers to not just have to do tons of animal experiments and repeat things 1,000 times. Basically, hopefully. Get rid of humans to a large extent. There's kind of a joke to say to kind of actually launch a product, you have to kind of get rid of the scientists and engineers because they just will tinker on something.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Forever.
I think they slow it down.
Yeah.
And so
I'm a PhD in it, and I was in med school at one point, so I feel like I can do those criticisms. But yeah.
And they're just way more efficient, and they have like, an AI has all knowledge at its fingertips, like LangChain and some of these other GPT index things will allow for people to automatically put in all of archive, all of bioarchive, all of med, all these things, and it'll just pull up like, here's the thing I'm looking at, here's all the related results in like 2 seconds. That would take like years of research maybe you might have a professor who might be able to like query different papers, but they'll be very out of date, and like that's just not an issue anymore. Like it'll just be instant. And it'll be very cool, and then also all the data sets will be linked to those PDFs in the future, and you can just like reproduce that data set, and there'll be like a Merkle root of all that data, and you just like store that Merkle root in your PDF paper or in your Jupyter notebook, and it's just like you can reproduce any part of the science experiment.
And I made the last point though about the next 3 to 5 years. I think we've heard a lot of talks here today, or over the couple days here, talk about really real world use cases. There's definitely, I'm old enough to know when the .com crash happened, and that it was, I know there's always kind of these comparisons between crypto and kind of the early internet, but it really is quite similar. There was, just not a lot of utility throughout the 1990s into the early 2000s. It was basically email and, a little bit, as Google came on with search. So, but it was really in the 2000s, right, when, so there was the big crash in 2001, and then the real things got built, the Googles, the Facebooks, everything else, all the infrastructure. So I think 2021 was basically our 2001 for the internet, and I think we got to actually prove something real, build some real stuff, so it's not just all kind of memeing things, memeing up,
This is the crypto winter that's going to end up building real stuff.
What's that?
This is the crypto winter. Of all the crypto winters, this,
hopefully. So, yeah.
Well, let's look forward to that. We'd love for the audience to give our speakers a final round of applause for being out here. And one last note before we drop out because of time, would love for you guys to shout out your socials or how people can reach out or learn more about what you're working on or what you're building.
We're WeaveChain Web3 on Twitter, weavechain.com. I'm Homer Carpenter on Twitter as well. Find me there.
My personal is 0xMikeyF on Twitter, and then our DB_DAO on Twitter. But I'll also pitch quickly. If you're in New York City, we host a once a month DeSci NYC group. It's really fun. There's like 50 or 60 people, pizza, really good speakers, like really academic speakers. You'll learn a lot and meet interesting people. So the next one's on February 16th in Union Square Ventures VC office, and we're doing another one in March. And I was going to say, if you want to find out more about that, go to dbdao.xyz, and then on the main banner, there's like a DeSci NYC.
I'll be there as well, so you can catch me there too.
And Beat It Out is just, beatitout.com, Beat It Out everywhere on the internet. I'm unfortunately like lame trad people. I have to use my middle initial, Tim R. Peterson, very generic name, so I do Tim R. Peterson everywhere. There's, in terms of DeSci, there actually is a website, I'm forgetting the name, it's DeSci.something, where you can see essentially all the events. Vincent Weiser, who's part of Beat It Out and Molecule and a bunch of organizations, he's led that. So I won't know the name, but if you look up his social, you can ask him what the link is, and that has tons of DeSci events all over the world, and so get involved.
All right, thank you again.